Not long after I came to the White House as a social aide, the Vietnam War started to wind down. President Nixon announced that he would be holding a dinner for the returning POWs. The date was set for May 24th, 1973. I was assigned by the Department of Defense to be the liaison officer between them and the White House. And I was just overlooking all of the events of the day. It was the dinner was the largest and most gala dinner ever hosted in the history of the White House. A gigantic yellow and orange-striped marquee was specially constructed on the south lawn to hold over 1,200 POWs and their wives or sweethearts. The marquee was actually longer and wider than the White House itself, if you can imagine. There were 3 two-tier chandeliers gracing the ceiling of the tent, 22 smaller ones, and 26 sconces, all specially made to match the chandelier in the state dining room of the White House. There were 126 tables for 10 each, and there were 2 18-foot long canoes for icing down the wine and the champagne. I remember the night like it was yesterday. It poured rain all day, and when the busloads of POWs arrived at the East Portico, they had to duck the downpour, good-naturedly, I might add. They arrived early enough to enjoy cocktails as they roamed the 3 open floors of the White House. Never before had the entire White House been open to guests. Usually it's just the ground floor. And so it was a very, very special occasion. By the time came to seat people in the marquee, the lawn, the south lawn underfoot was oozing with mud and water. Women held up their dresses and ruined their shoes, and they splashed through the puddles to get to their tables, and nobody minded at all. Everyone was so excited to be part of such a historical event. And few people had ever seen the president and commander-in-chief more jubilant or expansive than he was that evening. He was at his most relaxed and genuinely happy. He had fulfilled one of his promises to the people of America, to end the war and bring home the POWs. Bob Hope was the MC for the dinner, the after-dinner entertainment, and there were other entertainers like John Wayne, Edgar Bergen, and Charlie MacArthur, Vic Damone, Sammy Davis Jr., Jimmy Stewart, to name but a few. And last but not least was a surprise, and it was Irving Berlin, who he had been asked earlier. I had just checked with Jack, and he'd been asked early, and he said, no, I haven't done a public engagement for a really long time. And so he said no. But then the day before, he called Steve Bull, who was the president's appointment secretary, and he said, I'm going to do it for my boys. So he actually was a surprise, and he led the entire tent in singing God Bless America. He was a senior gentleman. He'd written that song way back in 1940. So many wonderful remarks were made that night by grateful POWs, but I noted in my diary that one that particularly struck home. One of the POWs said about his experience in Hanoi Hilton, I've been in better places, but I've never been with better people. Sadly, I did not note the name of that POW. Captain James Stockdale, senior POW, said, quote, as a great poet said nearly 4,000 years ago, nothing is so sweet as to return from sea and listen to the raindrops on the rooftops of home. We're home, America. America, God shed his grace on thee. And one more quote by a captain in the Air Force, David Gray. A loving God made me an American, and to America I return. A loving president preserved my honor, and with honor I return. A loving wife waited with strong heart, and to her I return. Thank you, America. The dinner was the culmination of a fabulous, I was going to cry, so I have my Kleenex. Anyway, it didn't. The dinner was the culmination of a fabulous day, but it started with a huge buffet breakfast at the Washington Hilton. The Hilton Hotel Corporation had generously provided free rooms and that great breakfast for everybody. Then in the afternoon, the POWs came to the White House for a briefing with the president, and the wives and sweethearts attended a tea in the diplomatic room at the State Department. I had the great privilege of being aide in charge for this event, and I was in the receiving line next to Mrs. Nixon, and the ladies would come, and I was there, and then she'd there, and this was the first time that I really got to notice the special way that she connected with each and every guest. She took each lady's hand in hers, not just one. She put her hand, and then she put her other hand on top of the lady's wrist. She held it warmly for many seconds, looked directly into their eyes with that beautiful smile that she's so famous for. Shortly after the POW dinner, it was my good fortune to be assigned permanently to the White House military staff. So I resigned my post on Capitol Hill, and I was given the title, get ready for this, it's long, Staff Assistant to the Military Aide to the President. And as such, I was now in charge of the military social aid program. But I actually got to sit at a desk in the social secretary's office, so I was dual-hatted, as they say in Navy lingo, and this gave me the best of both worlds. I made a typo in the speech. It said dual-hated. Anyway, I fixed it. The social secretary and her assistants planned and attended all the social and military functions, including church services, honor ceremonies, receptions, luncheons, events on the presidential yacht, and others. But most exciting of all were the dinners honoring the visiting heads of state. I worked state dinners for Prime Minister of Germany, Emperor of Ethiopia, the Shah of Iran, the King Hussein of Jordan, President of Romania, Prime Minister of Israel, Prime Minister of the Ivory Coast, to name just a few, and not necessarily in chronological order. A particular responsibility of mine was arranging the logistics and rehearsals for the performing artists that entertained the guests after state and other high-level dinners. I also wrote the official programs for the performing artists, and Lucy Winchester, the social secretary, insisted that we refer to the entertainers as performing artists. I was amused by the first dinner I worked. It was for the retirement of Secretary of State William Rogers, and the performing artist was Roger Williams. I don't think it was on purpose. It was an exciting experience to work with the top performing artists of the day, including pianist Roger Williams, Johnny Mathis, Tony Martin, Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Eugene Fodor, Beverly Sills, Pearl Bailey, the Carpenters, to name a few. And the White House, I don't know if you noticed, but I put some out on the table. The White House communications agency always recorded the presidential remarks and the entertainment for state dinners. And I was asked tonight to bring some mementos and some memorabilia. So I found these tapes, and look what I think I found, the missing 18 minutes. My very first charge was Johnny Mathis. When I escorted him to the East Room for his rehearsal, it was freezing cold. I learned that day that the temperature in the East Room was always set to 32 degrees Fahrenheit for several hours before any event, so that it would be cool enough for the 240 people that were going to sit down there later in the evening. My favorite entertainer was Tony Martin, because he offered me a job. He was warm and charming, and he and his wife, Sid Charisse, did offer me a job as their assistant, which I politely declined, of course, because what's better than working at the White House? The President and Mrs. Nixon also held wonderful church services. They were conducted about once a month, and various denominational folks would come in to conduct the services. And one of Mrs. Nixon's wonderful traditions that she also started was to allow each social aide to invite a family member to one event a year at the White House. And you could pick the event, with the exception of state dinners. So I picked a Christmas church service by Dr. Graham. And my dad came, and I have a lovely photograph of my father and I shaking the hands of President Nixon and Dr. Graham. And that's the second time I got to shake President Nixon's hand.